Howdy folks, this is Big Sam. Welcome back to the Mosin Museum. Today, we're going to be doing something really cool. We're going to be taking a look at as close as we can really get so far to a comprehensive guide to Austro-Hungarian markings that you might find on a Mosin Nagant. Now, we're going to quickly sort of go through one by one some of the markings that you'll see going from most common to least common. And then what we're going to do is, after we get through some of the cool markings, we're going to talk about what types of guns to look for and what models of guns to look for if you yourself want to try to find a Mosin that has one or more cool Austro-Hungarian markings. So to try to make this video as short-winded as possible, let's just get into our first rifle here. And specifically our first marking, I guess. Again, going from most common, starting out, we have the notorious AZF marking, which stands for Artillerie Zugfabriek. Let me find my little handy little pointer here. There we go. Which is going to be this guy right here, this AZF. Now, this is, I'm not going to say this is a common marking. If anyone says this is a common marking, they're kind of crazy. The AZF marking is not common, but it is the most common of the Austro-Hungarian markings that you might find on a Mosin rifle. Now, typically, this marking is going to be found here at the 12 o'clock position on the receiver. You don't really find this marking on the barrel. And we've already done a Mosin markings video, so this isn't, again, going to be a deep dive. We're just sort of doing a general overview of things to look out for. Now, the AZF marking, again, this would have been applied from around 1915, maybe very late 1914 at the earliest, up through 1917, potentially 1918. So you're only going to find this marking on hex receiver Mosins. If you have a round receiver Mosin, if it has this marking, it's going to be a fake. Although I've never personally seen a fake AZF marking before. They're very uncommon. Sometimes you can also find this marking on other rifles, such as Barendorf 2s, although that's pretty uncommon. And I've even seen this marking before on a Italian Carcano rifle. So sometimes you will see this on other rifles, but it's most common to find this on a Mosin. And this, of course, was applied by AZF, which stands for Artillerie Zugfabriek, which is this massive arsenal slash factory slash repair center slash railroad hub slash housing for workers slash basically you name it. It was a huge lifeline for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So they had a lot of Mosins getting shipped here for repairs and things like that, which is one of the reasons why this marking is the most common. And, we can go ahead and talk about this marking down here, although this technically isn't Austro-Hungarian marking. Since we're already on this rifle, I'm going to throw this marking in as a bonus. This is actually a Czech provincial marking. This would have been applied after World War I. Occasionally, you'll see this marking, although this is actually a pretty uncommon marking to find on a Mosin. When you find this marking, typically it's on something like a Steyr M95. The Czechs seem to have more of those that they would put these markings on, as well as bayonets. You don't typically see this on a Mosin, so that's kind of unusual. But again, this is post-World War I, post-Austro-Hungarian Empire, but it's right here, so I figured I'd just throw that in. So that's a little bit of a bonus for y'all. All right, let's take a look at our next marking. All right, so our next marking is going to be this. This is really cool, actually. This right here, it can be kind of hard to read. This almost looks like a C. This is actually OEWG, which is better known as the Steyr factory in Austria. Now, this is a cool marking because a lot of these guns were upgraded. I don't know if refurbished is necessarily the right word. When you see this marking on a Mosin, more than likely it means it was specifically taken to the OEWG factory in order to have the rifle converted to the Austro-Hungarian 8x50 rimmed cartridge. Probably not always, but again, from what I've seen, typically you're going to see that on there. And a lot of times with that, it seems like the OEWG factory, because they would rebarrel, or sometimes they would actually rebarrel these guns. Not exactly sure if they were really specific in making sure that the same barrel they removed was the same barrel that went back on the receiver. But when you see this OEWG marking, the reason I bring up rebarreling right here, this marking, is because if you look on the left side of the receiver of a rifle with this marking, usually you're actually going to end up seeing a serial number on the left flat of the hex receiver right here. This one's really interesting because this is, most people might look at this and think this is gibberish. It's actually not. So what you have here is two different serial numbers. You have the serial number that was actually added by the OEWG factory when this rifle was reconverted to 8x50 rim. Then you also have the import mark, which was the serial number of the rifle that the importer added to make the ATF happy. If you'll notice on this one, the serial number is 19784. You'll see here, there we go, 19784, and then you have these other numbers here that were part of the, again, the stamp that the OEWG factory stamped. It gets kind of complicated when trying to figure out exactly what happened here, because some of these are crossed out. You see this E. The E actually, in this case, probably the importer, again, which is also really weird because that tells me the importer, I know we're going down the rabbit hole, so I apologize, but this is interesting, so I wanted to bring this up. Importer actually got confused with the serial number because the serial number of this rifle is 19784 from the Ijev's factory. The Ijev's factory actually never put some kind of a suffix. You have this weird marking over here, which kind of looks like an E, or if you looked at this marking sideways, it could look like try to turn it left 90 degrees, it could look like a box with a T in it. So not exactly sure. This was not added by the Ijev's factory. This is not part of the serial number. Originally, this was added by a different country, potentially Austria-Hungary, also potentially even Ottoman Empire. We're not exactly sure. That is a topic for another day. Let's not go down the rabbit hole anymore because there is way too much to talk about with rifles like this. But that's the OEWG marking. This is a very uncommon marking to find on Mosin rifles. However, if we have to categorize again the Austro-Hungarian world of markings, this is probably going to be the next most common marking after the AZF marking. Now, then I would say the most common marking after this one, the next most common marking, would probably be, it would actually be one we don't have here at the moment, but it would basically look like two W's, and that would stand for Wiener Waffenfabrik. Again, this would have been just another Austro-Hungarian arsenal that was either repairing or modifying these guns. And the Wiener Waffenfabrik would be basically a W and a W below that, so it just looked like two W's right on top of each other. And much like the OEWG marking and the AZF marking, the Wiener Waffenfabrik marking would be in the same area at the 12 o'clock position on the top flat of the hex receiver. So that's going to be that one as well. Let's take a look at the next most common Austro-Hungarian marking. Let me get this guy out of the way. All right, so this next gun is really interesting, and I'm going to do my best to not go too far down the rabbit hole. There's a lot to talk about this one. We're going to save it for another day. The main thing to note here, this is an Ijev's Cossack rifle. I'm going to try to get it so where this light isn't shining right on the marking so you can at least see it. Okay. We'll zoom in a little bit more. It's kind of small on this particular guy. The marking in question is this marking, this S2 dot marking. I just call it the S2 marking. You'll see a couple different flavors of this. And I guess a better way to say the flavors would be fonts. You'll see a different couple fonts of this. This one, as you can see, is a very small marking if I zoom out. Compared to the whole barrel itself, this is a pretty small marking. You can see it's kind of comparable to the size of a D marking. A lot of y'all are probably familiar with that marking. So this one's fairly small. I've seen some S2 markings that are much larger, where the S would probably be like this size. So probably at least 3 to 4 times as large. We don't know a lot about the exact meaning of this. We could do a whole nother video again just talking about this marking. The best way I could describe this marking is that it indicates this was issued by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So if you see this S2 marking on the barrel, that indicates Austro-Hungarian use and likely capture as well, unless it was given to them by Germany. But, you know, between that and capture can be very hard to distinguish. So typically we would just say this is an Austro-Hungarian captured and issued, a reissued rifle. And again, the S2 marking you're going to find on the barrel shanks. Unlike the other markings where you'll find them at the 12 o'clock position on the receiver, this you really only see on the barrel itself, which is something I think worth noting. Okay, so that covers this one. Now, for the next marking that we're going to be talking about, let's look at something a little bit different. All right, so now we're really going down the rabbit hole, and this is going to be a very unusual marking. Here we have a French contract 1894 Châtellerault rifle. Let me again move here. Sorry, I apologize for the glare from that light. It's a very, very bright light, which is both a good thing and a bad thing, right? Let's zoom in a little bit here. Get our focus right. See how well we can get our focus in. Well, we might have to call this good for now. If you think it was hard to focus here, which it is, you should have seen how hard it was to actually get a good close-up picture of this marking, because it's not that big. All right, so I apologize because this isn't the easiest thing in the world to see, but the marking we're looking at right here is this oval, and you need to look at it sideways to see what it says here. So I'm going to try to get it like that. It says JSE, so hopefully you can see that. JSE in sort of an oval. Let me get this guy back here. So now that you know how to actually look at this marking. What is JSE in an oval? That is a good question. Not a lot of good information on this marking, and we'll end up doing a whole video to talk about it, but that stands for Johann Springer's Urban. Now, Johann Springer's Urban is a really interesting gunsmith. And basically, for the purposes of this video, just know that they were a purveyor to the imperial court of extremely fine hunting weapons. So basically, you can kind of think of it as the emperor himself would directly purvey really finely crafted weapons from them. They made really Gucci guns, essentially. They ran into some financial difficulties because it seems like the majority of their workers actually left and probably went to work at AZF during World War I. And it seems like they actually resorted to working on Mosins. Now, this guy in particular was converted to the Austro-Hungarian 8x50 rimmed. Again, we'll do another video on this guy, but note that the JSE, I guess, factory gunsmith is really more appropriate because this was a pretty small facility compared to like OEWG Steyr. Compared to them, JSE was what we would call in America a mom and pop shop, something that's just sort of small. these guys were really specialized, and they actually would, as far as we can tell, re-rifle these guns for the 8x50 rimmed cartridge. And it seems like they did a fairly good job, as good as anybody could really do in doing something as sketchy as that. This is not a very common marking to see. Typically, again, you are going to see this somewhere on the barrel shank, although I think I may have, I'm really testing my memory, I may have seen this on receivers as well, but for the majority of the time, I would expect to find this on the barrel somewhere. Okay. The final marking, we're going to come back to this, but the final marking I want to talk about is, which is probably even a little bit less common than this one, is going to be a bear marking. It's called the Barendorf bear. And that just referred to a smaller gunsmith slash arsenal in the town of Barendorf, which I'm trying to remember where that's at. Some of y'all can look it up and figure out where that is. But they would stamp their guns with, it would just be the shape of a bear. And that would typically actually go on the receiver. That is an extremely uncommon marking, and hopefully one day we'll have a chance to take a look at one of those. That one's, I would rank that as probably the least common of all the main well-known Austro-Hungarian markings, because that's the one I've seen the least. I've seen several of these. I've probably only ever seen one or two of the Barendorf bear markings. This one, though, I think is probably, if you were to ask me, sorry, I dropped my handy pointer. If you were to ask me which one is the most desirable, I think it's going to depend on who you ask. My opinion is that the JSE is probably the coolest one, and the main reason is because Johann Springer's Urban is actually still around to this day. And there's actually a really other cool reason that connects this with some of our older stuff we've looked at. Again, we're going to have to do a whole nother video talking about just JSE because it really deserves it. But this is pretty cool. So, before we talk about how to actually find and what to look for if you're trying to find some of these cool markings, one other bonus marking I'm going to throw in, if we actually look at this rifle from the side, is the sight base. So if we look at the sight base, you can see on this guy, he's marked 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can kind of see some milling that was done here. That is an indicator that this rifle has been in fact converted to the Austro-Hungarian 8x50 rim cartridge. These markings indicate a Schritt, SCHRITT, which is essentially an old unit of measurement from the Austro-Hungarian Empire that's antiquated. That's what that is. If you have a finished Mosin, it may have these, but they'll almost always be crossed out. And on the other side of the sight base, which this one doesn't have, because it's not a finished Mosin, but on the other side of the sight base, they would have the markings re-entered as meters. Okay, so if you're looking to add a firearm that's got an Austro-Hungarian captured firearm, or a firearm that has Austro-Hungarian markings to your collection, where do you start? What do you look for? Okay, well, you're going to want to look for a finished Mosin, because the vast majority of Austro-Hungarian Mosins that are still around, I would say 90+%, probably closer to 95%, that is still around, ended up in Finland one way or another. That's mainly because Finland went after World War I, and after they gained their independence, they would go and try to acquire as many Mosins they could from Central Europe. A lot of those Mosins they ended up with, which nobody wanted, were converted to the 8x50 rimmed cartridge. And even by the end of World War I, that was kind of an antiquated cartridge. It's much less powerful than 7.62x54 rimmed, and there was just a lot more 7.62x54 rim around, especially in Finland, because Finland was once part of the Russian Empire. But anyway, Finland would end up acquiring vast quantities of these, and pretty much nobody, after World War I, nobody really wanted a Mosin that was chambered in 8x50 rimmed. Now, not all Austro-Hungarian captured Mosins were rechambered to 8x50 rimmed, but because Finland probably acquired the majority of Mosins that were in Central Europe at the end of World War I, pretty much all of them ended up getting bundled in there. So what the situation you ran into was a lot of these guns were captured by the Russians, reissued by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The majority of those were then reacquired by Finland in the 20s and 30s, and then Finland would ended up re-rifling some with the Salerno sleeve. They would end up rebarreling some, and they would also end up reusing some as is because some of them weren't even converted to a different cartridge. But the easiest way to find a Mosin with an Austro-Hungarian marking is going to be to find a Finnish Mosin. Now, some of these markings are actually going to be really hard to find, and here's why. In particular, the JSE, which is one of the reasons I like it so much, it's actually kind of hard to find because a lot of the time you find it on guns that were, not always, but a lot of the times these were stamped on guns that were re-rifled to 8x50 rimmed. Thing is, if you think about it, and this is going to make sense here in a little bit, but if you think about it, you're not going to find this on many Finnish Mosins because if Finland got a Mosin that was rechambered in the 8x50 rimmed cartridge, they probably rebarreled it or they re-sleeved it. And in either case, you're not going to have this marking anymore on the barrel shank. Either the barrel's going or they would have just removed all the markings on the barrel shank anyway. And because this is usually on the barrel shank, and because you usually only find this on Finnish Mosins, this is a pretty hard marking to come across. Now, this isn't a Finnish Mosin, which is one of the reasons we have it on here. We'll talk about this rifle another day, but this is something important to note. The easiest way to get an Austro-Hungarian marked Mosin is to find one or find a Finnish Mosin that's using an older receiver with the Austro-Hungarian markings on the receiver. The first rifle that we took a look at, if you recall, was that 1940s Tikkakoski barrel, but it had that old receiver that had the Austro-Hungarian AZF marking on it. That's really what you want to look out for, is some type of Finnish rebarreled M91 rifle. Sometimes you can find those, even though they have a barrel from the 1940s, they may have a cool Austro-Hungarian marking on the receiver. It's not super common, but that's the easiest way to get one. Now, past Finnish Mosins, this becomes a lot more difficult. Very occasionally, you'll find what we would consider a Balkan gun. So an M91 that was imported from the Balkans, so like some of the Yugoslavian states, Serbia, and also some guns from Bulgaria. Occasionally, you'll see an Austro-Hungarian marking on those, but that's very unusual. Typically, you won't see such a thing. And it doesn't make a lot of sense that an Austro-Hungarian Mosin that was retrofitted to the 8x50 rim cartridge would have stayed in inventory through the Cold War. That's almost unheard of, although it did happen at least once because, well, we'll have to do another video on that because that's, again, another rabbit hole we don't need to go down for the purposes of this video. The last one, which is what we have here, is essentially what you would consider a World War I bring back that's in an Austro-Hungarian configuration. Probably not going to run into one of these. This is kind of a one-off. This is kind of a one-of-a-kind gun, but this is actually a World War I bring back that's 8x50 rim, and we'll do a video talking about how this rifle got back to America, because it's, while I don't definitively know, I'm pretty sure I know, and it's a wild story that you probably never even heard of. But again, that's a topic for another day. Now, just because a rifle doesn't have Austro-Hungarian markings on either the barrel or the receiver doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't used by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. you may have a Finnish Mosin that's got all new, that seems like it's got all new components and it doesn't have Austro-Hungarian markings, but another thing to look out for Austro-Hungarian use, again, and my apologies for making you sick there, is you can also look at the stock. Like this guy has Austro-Hungarian sling swivel at the back and up here on the front as well. So that's also something to look out for. In fact, the previous rifle we took a look at that was Austro-Hungarian was clearly Austro-Hungarian used. However, it didn't even have Austro-Hungarian markings on the gun itself. Kind of a sleeper, but very, very cool nonetheless. So I really hope that I didn't rant too much. It's really easy to get excited and just go down weird tangents, but the point of this video was to try to make a brief guide, a brief overview of Austro-Hungarian markings that you might find on Mosin Nagants. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. We do have separate videos that's more of like a one-off deep dive on a particular marking or a particular gun, but I had a user request just an overall guide, so hopefully you found this helpful. If not, let me know. But again, I appreciate you guys watching, and be excited because we're going to be talking about another really cool rifle very soon. I believe it's actually this guy. We're going to be doing a whole other separate video because, let's face it, this rifle's weird enough to where I think he deserves his own video. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if you guys have any prayer requests, and we'll see you next time.